Yggdrasil is the fictional video game on which nearly all characters, mechanics and systems throughout the Overlord universe are based. Released in 2126, it was a free-to-play game that became extremely popular. It was a DMMORPG, or Dive Massively Multiplayer Online Role-Playing Game, allowing players to immerse themselves in the game world through a neural interface system. The player's movements and actions were automatically transferred to their in-game character, letting them control it and select various tools. The player's field of vision included standard options and displays like time, mana, HP or the menu, and there were many tools for quick access as well as hotkeys. The name, game world and design of Yggdrasil draw heavily on Norse mythology, in which Yggdrasil is the world tree. The game's story also centers on this mythology. Many item and spell names and all 9 worlds within the game are directly inspired by or derived from Norse mythology. But what kept Yggdrasil popular for nearly 13 years was not its mythology, but rather the incredible freedom players had to do almost anything. They could travel to virtually any location across all 9 worlds, customize the appearance of any item, create an entirely new item, form their own guild, design NPCs and even program certain things, including custom security systems and NPC gestures. This incredible freedom extended to other aspects as well. There were over 700 sub-races divided into 3 primary races, which players could freely choose from. The game was extremely advanced, even detecting how the character's facial expression should appear based on what and how players said things. And for races where this was difficult to implement, developers simply added emojis. The game therefore truly paid attention to detail. The game also had suitable music that varied based on location. For example, in cities there was music reminiscent of a medieval marketplace. However, since this music often drowned out the sounds of nearby monsters, many players simply turned it off. The world of Yggdrasil was nearly unrestricted and vast, approximately the size of Ireland. The 9 explorable worlds were Asgard, Alfheim, Vanaheim, Nidavellir, Midgard, Jotunheim, Niflheim, Helheim, and Muspelheim. Each of these worlds had enormous areas and unique regions as well as dungeons, cities or hidden places to discover. Or in a nutshell, extensive. The farther one ventured from the center of each world, the more dangerous the terrain and the monsters become. Each of these 9 worlds offered certain racial advantages depending on where players were located. Generally, human races were favored, but there were worlds where the opposite was true. The heteromorphic, or in other words the unhuman races, for example, were at a disadvantage in most worlds, such as Asgard and Midgard. Human and to some extent demi-human races enjoyed damage immunity in cities and safe zones, where they couldn't be killed or hurt. Except the heteromorphic players, they were not safe. But the opposite was true in 3 of these 9 worlds, where heteromorphic races were favored. One could say there were 3 worlds per primary race. A unique aspect of Yggdrasil's game world was that many locations could only be found or accessed under specific conditions, such as a frozen city in Niflheim that could only be discovered during a blizzard. Since Yggdrasil revolves around leveling, it naturally featured plenty of dungeons. Yggdrasil boasted an enormous number of dungeons with varying difficulty levels. Alongside regular dungeons, there were also guild dungeons that could be claimed and used as a base or home by player guilds. Owning a guild dungeon allowed for complete customization and even the creation of 3 types of NPCs. There was the so-called pop monster system, which generated weak, free monsters to daily defend the base. Then there was the option to pay for temporary NPCs, so-called mercenary NPCs. And the third option was to create custom NPCs who didn't simply disappear and whose appearance, race and even classes players could freely choose and customize. The level and number of these custom NPCs depended on the guild dungeon's specifications, since each guild base had a specific number of NPC levels to allocate. For example, if the base allowed 150 NPC levels, players could create 1 level 100 NPC and 1 level 50 NPC. Or of course any combination that didn't exceed this value. Nazarick itself possessed 2,750 NPC levels, which could be further increased with Yggdrasil gold, so that Nazarick eventually had over 3,000 NPC levels. There were only 9 guild bases in the entire game that had a base NPC level of 3,000, one in each world. Within each dungeon, whether a guild base or a regular dungeon, there had to be a path to the center or core of the dungeon. The system that ensured this in all 800 guild dungeons and other dungeons was called the Ariadne system. At the end of every dungeon there was at least one boss monster. Along all the bosses there were exactly 32 creatures considered the most powerful in the game, the so-called world enemies. They not only granted a lot of XP but also rare items, including world items, the strongest and rarest type of item in the entire game. In addition to defeating monsters and exploring dungeons, players could also earn gold and experience points through quests or by selling items and materials. And if you wanted to enjoy the game with a friend, you had to be part of a party to take on quests, dungeons and more together. A group could include up to 6 players. If you wanted to connect with and coordinate more than 6 players, you could create a clan. A clan was informal, more or less a loose alliance. However, to establish a formal guild, you needed a special item called a guild scroll, which could be bought for an unspecific amount. Guilds had a maximum of 100 members and could own a guild dungeon. If you weren't part of a guild, it remained a regular dungeon and could not be claimed by you. Being part of a guild offered many advantages and a wealth of exclusive content, such as custom NPCs and guild weapons. For all types of activities, whether it's gathering herbs, crafting armor, or taming monsters, there was a corresponding class. Upon first logging in, you could customize your avatar by choosing your race. Options including human, demi-human, and heteromorphic. Depending on the chosen race, you could then select a sub-race. For example, if you choose the human race, you could play as a human, dwarf, elf, dark elf, rainbow eye, winged human and others. The demi-human races included ogres, goblins, beastmen, catgirls, minotaurus, giants and more. The heteromorphic category encompassed angels, skeletons, slimes, golems, 100 mouths, insects, doppelgangers, fairies, automatons, draconians and many of the over 700 sub-races. After choosing your primary race and starting sub-race, you could then select your first job or profession class, which would form the foundation of your character. Mage and swordsman were just 2 of many options. Which classes you could choose and learn depended on your race, sub-race, level and other job classes. Each race had specific advantages in learning and mastering certain abilities and spells. For example, as a heteromorphic with the Overlord sub-race, you gained a racial advantage in learning instant kill magic and necromancy. Once you had gathered enough XP, you would then level up. The maximum level was 100 and each time you leveled up, you earned a skill point, which could be freely invested in either a racial class or a job class. The human race, however, had no racial classes, while the demi-humans and heteromorphics did. Racial classes expanded the character's abilities based on race and the number of levels in these classes, granting additional racial advantages, resistances and skills typical of the species and its specific development level. Higher level racial classes could transform the player into a more advanced form of their sub-race, but only if a certain number of levels had been invested in the preceding racial class. For example, if a player started as a skeleton mage, a basic racial class within the skeleton race, they could unlock the second evolution stage, Elder Lich, but only at a certain overall level and after investing a set number of points. Repeating the step lead to the final stage, Overlord. Overall, each race unlocked the second stage at around level 30 or 25 and the third stage at level 70. The more levels invested in a racial class, the more the character's appearance changed, with each level bringing the character closer to the next evolutionary form. Some spells and skills could also only be learned by certain races. While racial classes depended on race, job classes were completely independent of it. Anyone, human, vampire or troll, could learn job classes. There were only 2,000 unique job classes, each offering specific abilities and skills. This was the main skill tree. The more level points invested in a job class, the more properties the class revealed, such as additional skills or access to more powerful spells. Job classes can also be called profession classes, as they targeted specific areas and provided the player with skills suited to that field. Job classes essentially defined the finer, more precise qualities and the usage options of the character. However, many job classes were only accessible after learning other classes. Additionally, class availability depended on the player's overall level and previous class path. There were also certain classes that could only be unlocked by defeating specific monsters or players, hidden content that players could also discover. All classes, regardless of racial or job classes, had rarity levels that determined the maximum investable points. Common classes allowed up to 15 points, rare ones up to 10, and very rare ones only 5. Common classes were mostly starter classes for specific fields. By leveling these up, players could unlock rarer classes for the same type. And very rare classes were often the highest tier of specific fields or classes. In battle, a character's total class configuration and stats determined their abilities and areas of strength. Stats were automatically adjusted based on classes and level, which meant that in cases like Momonga, the MP or mana stat exceeded the limit because certain classes promoted this. However, this was an exception and not the rule. By leveling up, players could not only learn and level classes to improve their stats, but also learn 3 spells from a predefined list with each level. To learn spells, you first needed to meet certain prerequisites, such as having a magical or semi-magical class. Once these were met, you could select a specific type of magic to specialize in, achieved through class choice. Once you have chosen a direction for your magic, this selection became fixed. The magic system in Yggdrasil was known as tier magic. It is divided into 10 tiers, plus an additional super tier, with each spell further categorized into 4 domains: arcane magic, divine magic, spiritual magic, and alternative magic. These 4 domains further branched into subcategories, such as fire magic or healing magic. The player's level and the number of levels in magic-based classes determined which magic tiers they could learn. Every 7 class levels in magic classes unlocked the next magic tier. Since the character started at level 1, they could learn tier 2 spells starting at level 8, tier 3 at level 15, tier 4 at level 22, and so on up to level 70. From level 71, players could learn their tier 11 spells, super tier magic, like Fallen Down, the spell which Ainz used to open his duel with Shell tier. Spell tier also determined mana cost. A tier 10 spell, for example, cost 10 MP. Only super tier magic required no mana, though it had an extremely long activation time and cooldown. Some specific spells and skills also required XP to activate, making them costly but immensely powerful. When casting, regardless of the tier, players had to avoid being struck, as this would cancel the spell. Since each level up allowed players to learn 3 new spells, a fully trained mage at level 100 would have up to 300 spells. However, certain items and special classes enabled player to learn even more spells. For example, our protagonist, Momonga, wields up to 718 spells due to the Dark Wisdom ability. Additionally, a paid item allowed any player to learn up to 100 extra spells. Magic can also be enhanced by leveling up specific classes. Alternatively, mages can also use meta magic, a feature that allowed spell upgrades in exchange for additional mana. The known meta magic list includes the following options: Boost magic, enhances a spell overall. Delay magic, causes a spell to activate with a delay. Maximize magic, increases both the minimum and maximum damage potential of a spell. Penetrate magic, raises the chance of bypassing the opponent's magical defenses. Silent magic, allows a spell to activate without any visible or audible cues, within limits of course. Twin magic, casts a spell twice simultaneously. Triplet magic, casts a spell 3 times. Widen magic, increases the spell's area of effect and range. Over magic, This one is unique to the new world and is not available in Yggdrasil. By using more mana, players could cast spells beyond their normal maximum tier. Each spell is associated with an element or attribute, such as fire, water, holy, time, death, etc. Certain races had natural weaknesses against specific attributes. For example, the dead are vulnerable to fire and holy magic. Leveling up granted better stats, more class points and access to additional spells. There were only one way to lose levels or switch certain classes, through death or special switching options. A player who died would lose 5 levels, which included all spells, classes and stat points from those levels. Additionally, a random item from the inventory would automatically drop, usually the highest ranking item. This system wasn't meant as a punishment, but rather encouraged players to experiment with different class combinations, as leveling up was relatively fast and easy. The developers wanted players to explore various combinations until they found an effective setup. The only 2 ways to switch classes were by winning one of the 9 Yggdrasil World tournaments, which granted the World Champion job class, or by using special items or entering specific locations that allowed a racial or class switch. Such transformations were race dependent. For example, a human could transform into an angel, demon or vampire, but a vampire could not become a demon, angel or human. Transformations were thus limited based on race. Yggdrasil offered of course also skills, which could be either passive or active. The skill system was similar to spell selection, but the method for acquiring skills was different. While spells required specific levels and a general magic orientation, for example, you need to be at least level 36 and have the either druid, cleric or priest skill tree to gain access to the level 6 spell Heal. Opposing to that, skills were directly provided by the classes. These skills were often basic boosts, but higher ranking or rare classes could dramatically alter gameplay with a single skill. For example, the World Champion class granted the World Gap skill, a more potent version of the dangerous spell Reality Slash, allowing limited resistance to world item effects, albeit with a high cooldown. The game world of Yggdrasil, as well as many items, ores and story elements, were inspired by Norse mythology. In addition to extensive character customization options, players also had advanced interaction and item systems. There were specific classes for detecting and mining ores, which could then be processed to craft armor, weapons and other items. Depending on the class, players could also create advanced items. For instance, a mage with the right spell and skill could craft healing potions, and a blacksmith could forge particularly strong armor. Although players without specialized classes could craft armor, it was not as strong as armor crafted by a blacksmith. The strength and grade of crafted items were determined by 3 factors: the material used, the crafting process, and the data amount within the item. Every item, regardless of type, contained data crystals or simply data. The material and crafting method determined an item's maximum data capacity. Monsters and other creatures dropped data crystals on death, which could then be added to items to enhance them. The data level of an item determined its item level, which affected its strength and effectiveness. An item of a higher level could not be destroyed by an item of a lower level. The item levels ranked from lowest to highest were low, middle, high, top, legacy, relic, legendary and divine. These levels could be reached by normal items based on their data capacity. However, there were also special levels designated only for certain items that could not be changed, including artifact, world champion items and world items. These 3 item types were indestructible, with the 200 total world items being the most powerful in the game. Some of these world items can even override game mechanics, making them ridiculously overpowered. In Yggdrasil, all items could be sold for a fixed price in city marketplaces. The in-game currency was of course gold, used for various purposes, not only for shopping but also for repairing guild bases, reviving NPCs, and in some cases casting spells. Overall, gold was relatively easy to earn in Yggdrasil, as every monster, boss and enemy or quest yielded significant gold rewards, which then of course influenced the inflation. For instance, items of the top tier could be sold for up to 100 million gold coins. In Yggdrasil, some items and features were exclusively available through real-life money purchases. Examples includes Ein's hourglass and the ability to wear rings on all fingers. The game's inventory system featured specific slots for head, face, body, 3 gemstones in addition to the rings, underwear, arms, hands, left and right hand rings, waists, legs and feet. Each slot was single use, and the only way to increase ring slots was through real-life money options. Every avatar in Yggdrasil had a hidden karma value. Players couldn't exactly view the stat directly, but a score below -100 was classified as evil, scores above 100 as good, and anything in between as neutral. This karma value fluctuated based on race and player actions. For instance, killing other players without reason lowered karma, while defeating monsters or completing quests raised it. Karma affected both PvP and PvE, with some abilities and spells dealing more or less damage based on this hidden score. A holy spell, for example, would be significantly more powerful when cast by a player with positive karma value. This system made Yggdrasil absolutely unique, emphasizing that power alone was not everything, and careful planning, skill use, strategy, and of course knowledge of the opponent often determined victory. In combat, players needed to consider not only their character's stats and skills, but also how to read and encounter their opponent. Tournaments in Yggdrasil offered various rewards, such as gold, items, or the World Champion title. Each world had a World Champion, with Touch Me being the World Champion of Alfheim and considered one of the game's strongest players overall. Tournament fights ran until the last hit point, allowing players to avoid level loss, and required 2 wins to claim victory. This specific setup encouraged players to potentially sacrifice 1 round to gather information without losing their overall advantage, provided they could use this knowledge to turn the fight in their favor. In addition to tournament matches and one-on-one duels, Yggdrasil hosted group battles and guild wars. Preparation, items, skills and knowledge were essential, along with each member's diversity and competence in their role. Ein's Olgone, for example, specialized its members into roles like Sniper, Necromancer, Healer and Glass Cannon, offering flexibility. Teams with diverse roles typically outperformed those with only 1 or 2 combat types, as variety allowed more tactical options. The game's balance was designed so that, aside from the World Champion class, every class and racial path had advantages and disadvantages. Strategy and knowledge were essential for victory, not raw power. For instance, a blacksmith might not be as effective in combat as a warrior, but only they could forge powerful weapons and armor for this warrior. Yggdrasil followed a general rule that magic required more planning than melee, as mages couldn't simply spam spells without exhausting their mana. Mages needed careful management of mana and ability, since unlike warriors, who had endless stamina, spellcasters would struggle if they ran out of mana. The so-called Magic Knight was an option that combined magic and melee combat, but would never surpass a pure warrior in close-range combat or a pure mage in spellcasting power. Most hybrid-type builds were considered third-rate, unless they specialized in 1 or 2 related fields, and not more. Yggdrasil developers received, let's call it, mixed feedback due to the game's complex balance and skill requirements, but ultimately the system provided a fair equilibrium between magic and melee. Playing as a melee fighter required real-life reflexes and reaction time, whereas mages depended on memory, hotkey setups and knowing their spell's effects to maintain control over battle. When players dealt damage to another player or an object, a red damage per second number appeared, showing the damage output. This value factored in the attacker's stats and the target's defenses, including resistance, racial advantages and other modifiers. However, in the new world, this DPS display and other in-game interface elements no longer exists. So, thank you for watching. This information-packed video provided deep insight into the game. If there were parts you didn't understand, leave a comment and I'll address the important ones for everyone. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed it, you know what to do. Until next time, ciao!